server and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, I mean, it's so scary. Like I don't know about the guys here listening, but the legal system is pretty darn scary if you don't have any experience. It's like everything is so unknown. What was your experience when you first walked into that first courtroom? Were you treated nice? I mean, did you know even what room to go to? Were you completely lost? What was
I
the kind of
didn't.
like,
I didn't
walk us
know.
through that?
I didn't know what room to go to. I was treated nicely by the court. In fact, one of the things that I never forgot is the attorney, my ex's attorney, pulled me aside before going into court to try to psych me out. And this is one of the things that I mentioned in my video, Mediation and Settlement. And I think I might have mentioned that in my part one of my doc. No, probably not part one, probably part three or part four. I talk about that. It's at that point that I realized that most people lose because the attorney psychs them out. So she was, asking me, hey, what is it that you're trying to get here? What kind of custody do you want? And I told her I wanted joint physical custody, and she
Sure.
laughed. She laughed in my face, and she's like, "Ha, you're not gonna get that." And I was like, "What?" And then I went into court and got it. So then I thought to myself, "Wow, I wonder how many people that actually works on." Where the reason that lawyers win is because they just trick you. It really doesn't have much to do with the system at all. And a whole lot of my initial videos on the channel stem from that experience. That was a really good question, by the way. Keep going if you have any more.
Yeah. So she's trying to psych you out. People say things like the words psych you out, but when it happens to you, you don't really know. You know what I mean? Like the words psych you out, they mean something when you're talking about playing basketball, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows what that means, right?
Yeah.
That kind of competitive game. But when it comes to a lawyer, what kind of things did they do that you consider like to try to psych you out?
Well, that was one of them right there. The other thing that they do is they try and make it seem like you can't win because you aren't an attorney. And there is some truth to that because I actually have a video dedicated to how exactly that works. It's called self representation bias. But it's not just automatically, hey, they're a lawyer, so they're going to win. It's more like they've played chess 100 times and this is your second game and you barely know how the pieces move. And so they win sometimes for those reasons, but it's not just like an automatic thing. Like you can even that out a little bit. You can get more understanding and experience. There are still some boundaries that you're just never going to cross as a non-attorney. So, for example, at an evidentiary hearing or a trial, they're going to have an advantage because they can kind of be more obnoxious and arrogant, and the judge won't take it out on the client. But if you try and do that, it's sometimes hard for the judge to separate your lawyer persona from your client persona, which the judges are supposed to understand, but they often can't, so they will hold it against you if you take that same sort of aggressive approach as the attorney. The other thing is the discretion, the problem of discretion. So I have a video called Discretion where I explain what that is, but
I
there's
love that
certain
video. Yeah.
areas of the there's areas of the law where the judges have leeway, and so in those areas there are sort of subconscious, I think, biases that'll trigger where the judge will just assume that what the lawyer is saying is probably right, and they'll assume that what you're saying is probably wrong. I don't think that they realize they're doing this. I think a lot, and the reason I say that is because I've had so many of them overturned on appeal. I think that they just kind of derp their way along and make the mistake and don't realize that's a bias that's occurring with them. It's just one of those subconscious biases, and the lawyers exploit that. So the lawyers know that, and they use it as a weapon. It's not like they're going to take a step back and they're going to be like, oh well, this kid needs both parents. It's like, this judge is going to assume I'm right, so I'm going to tell the judge something that's wrong on purpose, knowing that he's going to assume that I'm telling the truth or that I'm right. And so this is just another common thing that attorneys do. So these are sort of there's a limit to where you can go as a represented person, but you really have no choice when you can't afford an attorney. You just can't afford an attorney, and you just have to go into a disadvantage.
Right. Or like in your situation where you had a very long legal battle, 7 years, right?
Yeah.
So there's no way. I mean, how much would that have cost you to have a proper litigator?
Probably like $250,000. That's, I don't even know. That's just maybe more. It's so, I mean, if you've watched my docket series, you'll see pull up how many filings that I'm at. I think I'm around 300
Wow.
filings. And All those
Wow.
hearings too. I think I'm at like 9 hearings. It's an insane amount of money. The hearings aren't even the
Right.
most expensive. I think it's the discovery and all of the paperwork that ends up costing you more. And then, of course, there's the Supreme Court appeals. So I filed like 11 appeals. That would have cost me probably like 15 to 25 grand a pop.
Whoa.
Yeah, each one of those. Yeah, it would probably, if without the appeals, it would have probably been around $250,000. With the appeals, it would have probably been around $750,000, maybe $1 million. This is just not. I think if more people knew that this was the reality of the situation, they would just represent themselves because you just come to that conclusion. It's like, I'm not a millionaire. How can I, you know, what are you going to do? Hire an attorney for one hearing? That's not going to work because as soon as the hearing's over, your ex is just going to go back to what they were doing before. And that's what happens in these cases. It's exactly what happens. So,
So you don't, right? You need that long-term staying power where you can keep your eye on the ball
mhm.
and keep relentlessly focusing, right?
Relentless is the key word. That's the only reason that anything that I did worked is, it's like they're kind of like kids in an adult's body and everything to them is a game. And so they're not really like thinking I need to do what's right for my kid. They're just playing this game that never ends. And so there's these strategies that come into play. And one of them is maybe your lawyer will quit. Maybe you'll run out of money. Maybe you'll just stop caring. And so these kind of like a toddler, like maybe this time it'll work. And so they just keep trying. And it's the relentlessness of it that actually worked in my case.
I call that strategy the cold Russian winter,
Mm,
because if you look at World War II was pretty much won by the cold Russian winter, which basically destroyed the German army.
mm,
And I think that kind of that stalwartness where you never, you just don't give up.
right.
I think that is very powerful in a battle like this
It's
because you're
exactly
just
right.
like, hey, I'm not going to get screwed over. I'm not going to let my child be abused, right? I'm going to
Right.
focus, right?
Right. And that's exactly, I'm not going to let my child be abused is exactly what kept me going all that time. A lot of people think that the litigation is causing the abuse. It's like, no. Then that's one of the reasons why so many judges make the mistakes that they do. I talk about that in the video, End of Filings is not end of abuse.
Oh, I
There's,
love that
yeah.
video.
And there's
Yeah.
another video, Fighting Makes It Worse, where I explain there are many situations where a dad gives up and doesn't fight and the mom abuses the child in a different way. Maybe it's not a way that's stemming from the conflict. Maybe they just get new boyfriends. They don't really care. They don't feel like they're being supervised or watched, and then their new boyfriends abuse the child. This is, of course, my gender perspective is male, but this can happen in other ways for the other gender. I don't know about your channel, but my channel is like 55, 45%. Very slightly edges towards women. 55% women, 45% men. It's kind of, I don't know what yours is, but
Mine is 94% guys and 6% women.
wow, yeah.
Yeah.
DSD, Dwayne from Dad Surviving Divorce, was pretty shocked by my ratio. But my ratio's never been pro one side or the other. It's always been
No, you're
aggressive.
very balanced. I like that. No,
Well,
I've always liked that about your channel.
I like to say that because I'm not really focused on targeting the gender in the first place. I'm focused on targeting the legal system. So, from my perspective, the problem is the incompetent judicial system, the incompetent family division, and so my target is the family division. It's not really the moms or the attorneys even that much. I mean, it sometimes will seem that way, but I've always believed that if the judges, did the job they were supposed to do, that the attorneys would fall into line because the judges are ultimately the ones that are in power. Anyway,
Right.
yeah.
Somebody said, why would you not have a lawyer? And I wanted to answer that one. Is that there's two reasons that I could see
There's
is
no choice.
right. There's no choice would be one. If the battle is going to be too expensive, or if you think it's going to last a long time, and the other person has more resources, then you essentially can't win because if you're hiring a lawyer, no matter how good that lawyer is, if it's going to last a long time and you can't go a long time, essentially it only gets worse because the more you use a lawyer, then when you don't have a lawyer, you're not going to know anything about what you even did or how anything works.
Right.
And so your quality goes to nothing. Where is if you start without a lawyer and you just learn everything, piece by piece, you'll slowly become more professional yourself and you'll be able to handle it, you know, the best you can, right?
Right.
And you'll be building blocks all the time. And
Yeah.
whereas if you're going to run out of money at some point, you may as well just do it yourself. That's my take. What's your take?
You actually answered. So this is a really good question. I know I laughed in the beginning, but this is a two-part answer for me. And you answered part two perfectly. So I'll explain part one. So when I initially went into my child custody case, I did not have that sort of complex analysis that you just got from Ronin, man. Um, I was in college and I made probably 10 to 15,000 a year. I was dirt poor, so I couldn't even afford the $5,000 retainer. There were some that charged $2,000. I couldn't even afford that. So my part one analysis was I couldn't afford anything at all. I had no choice but to represent myself. Zero. And then I know some people say that in some states you can get a free attorney. In Nevada, you're more likely to win the lottery than get a free attorney. My understanding is that they only give free attorneys to people who have been stabbed or shot by their ex, and there's like a conviction for
That's a
like,
big price to pay.
yeah, if you've been stabbed or shot and there's a conviction for domestic violence and they're like a felon, you'll sometimes, not even all the time, you'll sometimes get a free attorney from the Legal Aid Center. That's the only hope that you have. You have to represent yourself when you're that dirt poor. Later on, I did make enough money to hire an attorney, and I did hire an attorney for a single hearing. For one single hearing, that's all I could afford, and I won that hearing. There were a couple of times where some friends that I had made represented me, and those were extremely limited. If you want to see this, you can just watch the My Docket series. It goes from part one to part 156, and I'm not even done yet. I think it's going to be done around part 280, somewhere around that ballpark, 280 to
Wow.
300, I'll be done. But if you watch parts 1 to 156 of the My Docket series, you'll see that I only have an attorney at a couple of blinks in the case when they were my friends, and then for that one chunk of I think 4 or 5 videos when I hired the attorney, and that was the only time I could afford them. So after that point, I realized that whether or not you use an attorney becomes much more complicated, and I would go ahead and explain what that is, but you just explained it perfectly. Exactly what you said was the reason that I decided at that point in time going forward, even though I could afford an attorney, the financial stranglehold it would put on my new family, because I now have, a wife. We don't have new kids, but I consider it a new family. So I married wife, and she adopted my son, and I just didn't want to put all of us into this crippled sort of financial chokehold going forward where, I mean, I don't know if you know what it feels like, but I've gotten emails from people who
Mm.
they keep paying their attorney, and their new girlfriend or their new wife just can't stand it because they're sacrificing vacations, trips, cars, because that attorney is taking so much money, and the case just doesn't end. It's not
I,
like, it's like what you said. So
I think that there's another aspect for me at least. There's I'm such a curious person. Like I want to figure everything out in life, you know.
yeah.
Like I've done a lot of different things. I've done a lot of different professions. I've lived all over the world. I went to 50 countries before I was 25. You know, I'm very curious about the world. And for me the legal system and everything was very interesting. You know, I wanted to understand it. You know, like I wanted to understand every kind of business when I was young. You know, I would see like a bakery and I would think, how are they making money? There's nobody in that store. You know, I would always be thinking that way. Like, how many people are coming in? How much those things cost? How can that guy survive? How many people work there? You know, and then I would see, and so when it came to the legal system, it was one of those things that I felt like a man should know something about. A man should understand because you can get hit blindsided, and the next thing you know, you're just, what do you do, right? You know, so I felt like it was something that I wanted to understand, and so when I had my first lawsuit, then I had a chance to, kind of be in it. Like there's part of me that actually enjoys everything I've ever done in life, everything
Hmm.
I've ever learned, no matter how hard it is. I enjoy it. Like I actually enjoy learning and I enjoy trying things and making mistakes too, and figuring things out the hard way.
You just went into something that I've always wanted to talk about, but I've never talked about it before.
What's that?
Exactly what you just said. So
No
there
way.
is a there was a point that I realized that my experience in the court system unlocked so many doors for me. And I don't want people to think that the court system is fun. And in fact, the way that you described it is probably the best way that I've I've never thought of describing it that way, but I exactly 100% agree with you. Yes, you should learn how to use the system. I know that it sounds bad, and I know that society tells you that suing is bad and you're evil if you sue and you should be civil, but if you have ever wanted to figure out these how corporate policies interact and interconnect with almost everything that we do in the world, what it's like to be able to defend yourself against a landlord, what it's like to be able to defend yourself against an employer. These are things that I realize that I haven't talked about on my channel because it's something that most people are afraid of, and it's alien to them and it freaks them out. Most people are afraid of the court system and they just want to go along with everything, and they don't. That curiosity that you have is it's probably what what I have too, and why one of the reasons why I didn't give up is I wanted to figure all these things out, and it helped me in so many different ways, and it's the reason why I'm able to do what I'm doing now with our Nevada judges, because rather than be afraid of the system, I sort of have become resilient towards its pressure, and it's I guess it's normally it's a terrifying experience for anyone, and now I'm like pretty much wading through it as I send camera teams into courtrooms to record hearings, and I post all of the mistakes judges make on the website and stuff. So I mean, I love that you just said that, because I've always wanted to tell my viewers that, but I thought it would come off as this is wrong, this is a bad person, you shouldn't like going to court, and that's not really what it's about. It's that
No, it's
inquisitive,
understanding the basic. It's almost like understanding the water in the ocean, because
right?
all of our businesses, all of our lives, every relationship we have, it's guided by, there's a legal system that overarches, that controls the
Mm-hmm.
way we can interact. And if you don't understand that, it really, it hampers your ability to. It's like if you can't program. If you can't program, it's really hard to start a new business if you don't
Right.
understand at all anything about programming, because you don't understand. It's like the difference between an architect and an engineer, right?
Yeah.
You need to know both how to make the building beautiful, but you also have to know how the weight is held up, and all the structure, the earthquakes, everything, and then you can be a great designer. A great designer like Frank Lloyd Wright, they can do both. They can design. They know the engineering of the building. They understand how the building structure works, and they also know how it looks. And together you can make. If you don't know those two things, you're so limited in life. And I
Right.
think that's the aspect I think about the legal system. It's like I've always been into business. I've always been starting businesses, but the legal system was something I didn't really understand. But it's like I knew at some point I needed to get into it. I needed to understand how things work, what I can do, what my risks are. Otherwise, you don't even understand what you're risking, right?
Mm-hmm. You just don't. Um, and it's so frustrating. I think for other people, I get messages from people like in New Zealand and Australia, and apparently they don't have the access to the courts that we do, and
Oh,
they're like, wow, I can't believe. I mean, there's this one person from New Zealand who she says that it drives her absolutely crazy that she can't file cases. She has to get approval from an attorney. They just can't. You just don't have access to the courts in New Zealand without an attorney's approval. And I guess in Sweden, it's the same way. In Sweden, government agencies mainly deal with controlling companies and stuff, and the individual doesn't have full access to the courts. And there's a lot of people who send me emails saying, I just can't understand why Americans, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot, I feel like there's almost like a propagandic level of stuff floating around in our culture, like America's the most litigious society on the planet and stuff like that. And I really question who is it that's spreading that stuff around. Have you seen the Netflix hot coffee video?
no.
It talks about the McDonald's case and how the coffee spilled and somebody sued
Oh, I
McDonald's.
heard that was really good on New York Times.
Well,
I was,
yeah, because
yeah.
the perception that the public has on the case is completely different from the truth. And it just makes me wonder how much corporate influence has sort of pervaded the average American's culture. It's to the point where their court system is used pretty aggressively, but it's not regular people using it. It's companies suing each other. And the only thing that the ordinary person is really subjected to is criminal proceedings and custody. And so it's like the ordinary person has been just kind of locked out through this like almost public shaming of, you're a part of the litigious culture of America and stuff like that. Most people are afraid and don't want to touch it. And we don't even realize what we have. And it's sad because when you only have I guess the negative sort of types of people using the court system, it's all it does is really just kind of continue this idea that only bad people use the court system. And what happens is you have all of these really good people out there who don't deserve to be abused, but they're afraid to use the court system. And so what happens is employers and landlords, I don't know if you've had any poor experiences with bosses and landlords. I have lots and lots of them, where they have this attitude of, we're just going to do whatever we want and there's nothing you can do about it. I
Well,
just feel like it's your approach and mentality. I really wish more people had. I can see why your channel has so many subscribers if you have a lot of videos like that.
I lived overseas for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived in China. I lived in communist China. I lived in mainland China. I lived in Japan, and I spent quite a bit of time in Thailand, India, Philippines, all over the place. And I can see the legal system from a different perspective. Like for example, in Japan, the legal system is very well. Actually, a lot of countries outside North America, the lawyers are really elite.
Mm-hmm.
Like in most countries, where like you got to be from a very wealthy family, and it's a sign of it's a prestige to be a lawyer. It's like very difficult, and it's very, what do you call it, corrupt or something. It's like there's a lot of old boy network stuff going on, and those guys control everything. You can't. I mean, not only can you not represent yourself, but no normal person can be a lawyer. Even they're never
Yeah.
gonna. It's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's only kind of a royal class of people, and then they end up representing their groups. And I don't want to talk bad about it because I think in the end, every society finds a way to balance things out. It's just that it's not as free to the individual as what you were talking
Right.
about.
Yeah. And that's it's so sad because it's like we have that ability, and the I guess you could say the people in control don't want, not only do they not want it, but they've been very successful in spreading what I consider to be, like I said earlier, this almost these propagandic ideals of the good and kind person just kind of being a sheep that is just fleeced for money. And I mean, I can't tell you how many experiences I've had through the court system where, I mean, did I tell you I've sued 3 towing companies and won all 3? I didn't even
I
tell you
heard the
that.
one where you had there was a sign in front of the other
Yeah, I mean, like,
store, and
this is not just me that's going through this. My car gets towed. There's no signs. I check the statutes. The statutes
yeah.
say you have to have signs. So I go into court, and the towing company's like, "We've been doing this for 10 years this way." I'm like, "Well, that's nice. You tow my car because you tow our cars because we don't follow the law. Well, shouldn't you follow it too? Why do we have to follow it but not you?" And that's what I told the judge, and the judge is like, "You know what? He's right. The statute says you're supposed to do this and you didn't do it. Pay him back." It's like, why do we have like a system that only applies to companies and rich people, and the rest of us we're just sheep. We just get sheared. It's messed up. So then I did it a second time and I won again. And then that time it wasn't me. It was my friend. She parked in my spot, and for whatever reason, the apartment said they had like a policy of towing cars that weren't registered to the spot or something like that. Well,
Mhm.
I helped her with her towing lawsuit. She won, got her money back. And then there was a third one, which was a different friend. And that one was easier. They just didn't even show up. They didn't show up, and they said something like, we didn't know because they didn't know to go to court because they didn't have enough time to show up in court. And the judge said, well, the statute says 4 days, so you lose. So that was just those. And then there was one where Verizon Wireless charged me for something, and it wasn't in the contract. It's like they just got so used to nobody fighting them, they just do whatever they want. So I don't know. It just feels wrong to me that only one side has to follow the rules and they're punished, and then the other side can just do whatever they want because everyone's just afraid to fight them. Because then you feel like a bad person. Like, how dare you go to court? Something's wrong with you. You're evil. Just like eat it and walk off. And all that does is just make them do it more because they just have gotten used to it. Millions and millions of people won't use the court system. So
Yeah, yeah. I talk
just
about this all the time on my
keeps
channel. Is
yeah.
guys, you need to stand up for yourself. You need to not let people walk. The reason why you learn to use these tools is not so you can abuse them. The reason is that nobody can mess with you.
Yeah.
It's like the guy in the Kung Fu movie, basically.
Hmm.
You know, that's the ultimate, that's the perfect. It's like nobody messes with him because they know the guy can take care of himself. And they're like, okay, it's like a car with an alarm. They're going to hit the car with no alarm. You just want to be a person that can handle themselves and understands what their rights are.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be fine. Hey, I got a good comment here. Let's see. What people don't know is that the courts are generally unforgiving. So you make a bad admission, then you have to live with it. Plus, the state and opposing party can sneak in inadmissible evidence, and if not immediately objected to, that evidence will stick, and it's hard to get rid of. That's a good comment.
Yeah, they're talking about the standard of review on appeal. So that's true. If you don't object and preserve an issue on the record, then you won't be able to challenge that on appeal. This guy's really smart. So that's one of the reasons why I won so many appeals is because I understand that principle. There are some exceptions to it. For example, plain error, and they also have subject matter jurisdictional errors that you can fight even if you fail to object at the trial court level. This is really good stuff to talk about because the problems that person brings up have to be addressed by filing appeals. And now you're talking about, now you're going from one court to another court inside of a court. So it's like the second layer of an already scary system where it's even scarier. This is just stuff that is, I think more people should talk about on YouTube because the schools don't teach it, TV doesn't teach it, the movies don't teach it, and I feel like all it's going to do is help society because, like you mentioned, I think you mentioned the car alarm thing. Right now, companies feel like only 1 out of 10,000 cars has an alarm, so they can play that game and abuse all these other people. But if more people knew and more people fought back, they wouldn't know which one of those is going to bite them back, and they would be maybe less likely to fleece people. This is stuff that's I've never. We should talk about this stuff more. I have to leave in a couple of minutes because I wasn't expecting to go live, but maybe we'll
Oh,
schedule
okay. I
something.
was gonna say. I think he meant too. I think he meant like if they ask you an inadmissible question that you're not supposed to answer, but once you answer it, then you have to keep answering, or that's part of the record now. So it's now fair game. So you
Well,
have to
it
be
becomes
careful.
part of the record, but it can be stricken from the record. This often happens during jury trials. And it also, even if it becomes part of the record and is stricken, if the judge decides to make a decision based on that answer, you can have that overturned on appeal. Because the Supreme Court of Nevada will not uphold or defer to a finding of fact if it is not supported by substantial evidence. So, evidence that's been stricken you should be all right. With juries, it's trickier because once the jury hears it, it's hard to get them to ignore it. The judge is supposed to give them an instruction not to, but sometimes juries won't follow that instruction. If you're representing yourself in child custody and divorce stuff, there is no jury involved. So you should be fine when it comes to that. You just have to learn a lot, and having that inquisitive mind that you have it's a recipe for success. I wish more people would use the court system when the stakes were low. Like if you get, I don't know, a ticket or something, don't lie and say you didn't do it. But if you legitimately have a defense, learn, go try it out, even if you lose, whatever. Learn like what it's like to use the system because you never know when you're going to be in a serious situation, like I was, child custody, and I mean, I wish we could talk more about this, man. I've got to wrap it up, though. Next time, let's schedule something, and then we'll stream to both channels simultaneously. We'll give your viewers a specific date and time, and then we'll come on. And
Okay, that sounds great. That sounds great. Hey, thanks so much for all the questions, everybody. And I can see everybody's all fired up tonight, Friday night. So
yeah,
appreciate it. And Alex, always, dude, it's always a pleasure. I
yeah.
so much appreciate you being on.
Yeah, let's talk about this stuff more. This really went into a direction that I didn't expect that I really like. I'm going to title my video something consistent with this sort of approach of
What
learning.
would you call this? What's off the top of your head?
I would call it getting out of your comfort bubble, maybe something like that on my channel. I mean, we can have different
Mm,
we can have different titles for our channels because we're gonna have different audiences on both channels. And
right. So,
we'll after I sign off, I'll go ahead and cut the stream in about 5 seconds, guys. I'll see you guys around. I'll stay on with you and we'll talk about it. So
all right. Thanks for listening, guys.
I'm gonna cut my feed. Go ahead and hit the end stream button and yeah.
Somebody said, great talk, Alex.